welcome to Addicted to Murder. This is Courtney, licensed professional counselor with over a decade of experience.
And this is Trisha, and I just saw this animal on Instagram, and it popped up on this card, so that's a clue, but bustards are weird looking.
Bustards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm imagining it as some kind of like weird deer-like creature.
No, it's this, I don't have my phone, but it's worth looking up. It's a large European bird with a 7-foot wingspan.
Oh.
And it has like this huge, like, not a turkey gobbler thing, but of feathers that go down to the ground. It's huge. It's a very bizarre bird, and it just popped up on my Instagram before you got here, and I was like, what a weird bird. And then it was just in my Boulder Dash card, so.
Well, that seems pretty much
Bizarre.
like fate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, hey, Courtney,
Hey, we're back.
what have you been doing the last 5 months?
I've been doing a lot of school,
Yeah.
and a lot of working, and then doing some more school and some more working mostly.
Aren't you like TAing?
I have been TAing. Yep. I've TA'd for 3 classes so far, and then just started 2 others. So those 3 finished and ended, and now I'm starting 2 more.
Do you like grading papers, or is that part of TAing? Like,
Grading is a little bit part of it. I'm not really, as a TA, allowed to grade like the big final papers. That kind of the real professor has to do that.
which they should.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm enjoying grading, and it's been really interesting to see the way that different minds work. Because I know how my mind works, obviously, on a lot of these topics, because they're things that I studied.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when
Yeah.
I read something that's surprising, and it's like, I wouldn't have thought of it that way.
That's like the sociology of it all, or the social psychology of it all, right?
Right, exactly.
How people interpret things differently.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I find that interesting too. Like when you do those, I don't know if you ever have to do these, but we'll have to do like little boards where we all post on the same topic.
Discussion boards.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. And then someone will bring something up and you're like, whoa, I never even thought of that.
Yes.
And then they'll say that about some of my stuff too. I like it.
Yeah.
It takes all kinds.
Absolutely.
Figure out shit.
Right. And I also get to see sometimes when the education system has not worked so well for some students.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, let's go back to basic writing skills.
Yeah.
But that's not very often in a master's program. Typically, if you get to a master's program, you know the basics.
Yeah. I only have 1 paper left to go.
Ooh.
I start my last semester in August, and then I'm done with my program.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and one of the classes is like, basically the thesis class. And I think what I'm going to do, because I selected my professor based upon it, and she agreed to work with me, is what makes a good witness.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, I'm going to basically focus on child witnesses, because that's what I'm around. But, like younger children don't make great witnesses on paper, when you read the statistics. And then when you have your trafficked kids, they don't typically make good witnesses
right
on paper. So just kind of looking at like that and then doing, it's probably going to be like a literature review is what I imagine.
Probably.
But I think that's going to be my topic.
Fun.
So that is coming. But I still have like a whole month.
Right. Yeah, you're taking the summer off from classes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've been learning how to do some new stuff at work. Been learning how to forensically interview people. So that is way more difficult than it seems. It's, when you watch it happen or you hear about what it is, it sounds pretty intuitive, but it's not. And it involves a lot of thinking.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill.
Yeah. It's tough. I've done a week-long training program on it, and then I have had some practice sessions, and it's difficult. So shout out to all of those who do that line of work and who do it well, because it's a bit of an art form, and your shit goes to court. So you have to have it tight.
Right. You can't mess it up.
Don't want to mess that shit up.
No.
So
yeah,
that's what we've been doing. Just
exactly. Yeah, I'm finishing up my internship this summer, and then come end of August or fall term, it is all dissertation all the time for probably the next year or so.
I don't envy that,
I'm
because
kind of
that's going to
excited
be
about
like
it.
100 pages, 200 pages.
Somewhere in between there, probably.
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of it's going to be a literature review and then data tables and stuff like that.
Yes.
And probably 30 pages of references, but still.
Right. Yeah. So that first term of dissertation is the literature review. So like that's all you work on for 16
And
weeks.
what's your topic? Do you know?
So my topic, so I decided to make things extra complicated on myself.
Of course.
So my topic for my dissertation will be looking at the impacts of certain factors on counselor self-efficacy and working with youth under 17. But in order to do that study, I had to create a measurement tool to measure counselor self-efficacy of working with youth, because that doesn't exist yet. So I'm actually already in the process of creating that measurement tool. So I'm doing some like extra dissertation steps before my dissertation actually starts.
So when you say self-efficacy, counselors measuring how well they are treating their patients, is that what?
Kind of. It's more like how confident they feel in their skills to be treating youth.
Okay. Because there's a lot of counselors that don't want to touch the youth population, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it all stems from the fact that there's a shortage of therapists in general, but there's especially a huge shortage of like child and adolescent therapists.
Yeah.
So if we figure out how we can help people gain the skills and feel more confident about it, then maybe we can figure out how to increase those numbers.
Yeah, let's hope so. Doctor.
Not quite, but
Yeah.
and hopefully
soon.
Hopefully, yeah, maybe a year from now I'll be Dr. Courtney.
Dr. Courtney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what I will go by with the kids. Cause
Yeah. Otherwise, you sound like an MD.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that's like stuffy and boring, and I don't want to be that.
Jeez. Blech. No, just kidding. I work with some great
Yes, we both do.
doctors, right? So I'm just totally teasing. Speaking of, we have some new listeners.
Yes, we do. We want to give a nice shout out to possibly the two people who have been boosting our numbers these last few months, as we have been not putting out new episodes. So thank you to our boss.
Yes. Thanks, Patty, and thank you, Amy.
Amy, yes, who is kind of like Patty's boss in a way.
Yeah, however that works. We appreciate that. And then as far as our other listeners who have just kind of given up on us, Whoopi and Kelsey, we told you we would be back.
And here we are.
And we're back. And we
Yes.
have a new case. And the case is, Courtney did this one, so it's going to sound a little bit different because I didn't read the script beforehand. She's going to do the narration, and I'm going to pop up with questions if I have any while we go through.
And I'm pretty sure you're going to have some good ones.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's a little bit different today, like Trisha said. So, I'm the one who wrote it, so I'll be sort of telling the story. It's going to be a single episode case, so one and done. And this is not actually a serial killer. But this case came to me, honestly, watching a Discovery ID show way back in the day. And when people ask me what is the most interesting case that I know about, this is the one that I always choose. So this is the case of Mary Bell, the killer child. And I am going to give a big trigger warning before we even get started with this case, as there will be extensive talk about sexual abuse and child murder in this episode. So you're sensitive to those things, maybe skip it.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go.
Okay.
So Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, 1957, in Corbridge, England. Mary was the second child born to her mother, Betty, who was only 17 at the time. So she's 17 with 2 kids now.
Dang.
And the man that Mary knew as her father, Billy Bell, married her mother when Mary was an infant. So it's unknown if he's actually her biological father or not, but it's the only father she ever knew. And according to her aunt, Mary was an unwanted child by her mother. And her mom reportedly told the nurses at the hospital to, quote, take that thing away from me, end quote, when they tried to hand over newborn Mary to be held.
So question right there. I have known people who've suffered from postpartum depression and have said, or maybe not said that, but made that very clear in the hospital. Do you think that this was happening with this, or do you think it was something different based on what occurs next?
I think in this case it was something different.
Okay.
Yeah. So Mary suffered many suspicious injuries as an infant, toddler, and young child while alone in the care of her mother. And it was suspected that Betty was intentionally trying to harm Mary. When Mary was around 3 years old, her mother purposely dropped her out a second-floor window. On another occasion, she tried to poison her with sleeping pills. And at one point, sold her through an illegal adoption agency to try and get rid of her. So,
how do we know this? Did Mary tell us?
Yes. So our main source for this case is a book. It's called Cries, Unheard, Why Children Kill, The Story of Mary Bell.
Okay.
And it was written by a journalist named Gitta, Sereny.
Okay.
And it was written in conjunction with Mary Bell as an adult. So it's kind of throughout her interviews with Mary over the years.
Got it.
So, yes, so we know this from Mary herself as well as her family members and things who have spoken to press.
Okay.
So, after she was sold, her her older sister, Catherine, actually was the one who went and got her and brought her home from this random woman that she was sold to. And so, as she got older, Mary was often left alone and unsupervised, kind of had to fend for herself, and would get beaten regularly by her mom when she did something wrong, like skip school or spill milk or anything. So, Billy...
Which is a really good book, just throwing that out there, Spilled Milk. Sorry. It's about child abuse. Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, Billy Bell, Mary's father, was an alcoholic and a criminal. He would go, quote, do business, which often meant committing robbery or burglary, and was in and out of jail throughout her childhood. Mary idolized her father in many ways. He was not abusive towards her, like her mom was.
Yeah.
But from an early age, she, learned the art of the con from watching him and helping him, steal and con people when he was, quote, working. And she would use these skills later to help obtain food when she was left alone, or to, get money for treats and toys and other things that she wanted.
So Mary was being physically abused, you could say attempted murder, by her mom, sold into what could have been sex slavery, who knows, by her mother. And then she had a criminal for a father who was teaching her how to be a con.
Yep.
And so, we're just thinking of how she's growing up, how she's learning life is. And I'm not sure how old at this time.
We're still thinking early childhood, early elementary aged.
So if we go back to our usual way of doing things, are you seeing attachment disorders developing here, or what do you think?
There are definitely some attachment disorders going on. I think after our next little bit of information about her childhood, that'll be definitely more solidified.
Okay.
So Mary's mother, Betty, was a well-known sex worker who specialized as a dominatrix of sorts, engaging in S&M behaviors with her clients. And so Betty would often travel to bigger cities for days or weeks at a time to meet with her clients, leaving Mary home with her by herself or with her drunk father.
Yeah.
And when Betty was home, the Bells' home kind of became her sex dungeon, so to speak. She would, So Betty started to incorporate Mary into her work by the time that Mary was 6 years old. She would blindfold Mary, bind her hands, and force her to perform oral sex on grown men. She also allowed men to molest, rape, and be physically violent towards Mary, if the price was right. Mm-hmm. And at times, Betty would participate in the sexual acts with Mary and these men. And if Mary tried to refuse, her mother would beat her. So a local police officer noted in an interaction in which he found Mary walking the streets alone when she was around between 6 and 8 years old, causing mischief. And in an attempt to get out of trouble, little, 8-year-old Mary offered to perform oral sex on him, which he fortunately declined.
So at 8 years old, she's already, or 6 years old, no. Well, between 6 and 8, she already is using sex as a means to get in and out of things.
Right, and to get the things that she needs.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of combining the things that her father is teaching her about the con with the things that her mother is teaching her about sex.
And knowing that police are going to put you in jail, and so you would do that to get out of that.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And so with that, I think we can definitely see the foundation for attachment issues and for obviously really intense trauma developing for Mary.
Definitely doesn't have any sort of normal childhood going on there.
Nope, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So at school, Mary was intelligent and capable, but she often skipped classes and struggled to accept adult direction. In the book, it talks about how her parents were very, anti-authority, and, behind closed doors would say things like, F the police, and, were against anything sort of government interference.
Sure.
So she also was coming from kind of that background. And so she also did not get along well with other kids her age. She was very emotional and prone to violent outbursts when her peers did something that upset her. For example, when she was around 10 years old, Mary was playing in a sandbox with 3 other girls, and one of them threw sand at her in response. And Mary grabbed this girl by the throat and started to squeeze with both hands until she started to pass out and was gasping for air.
Do you think that Mary witnessed strangulation?
Absolutely, and possibly even experienced it herself.
Yeah, okay.
So she did have one friend, Norma Bell, coincidental last name.
Yeah, it's weird.
They were next door neighbors, the Bell families, but not related. And so Norma was a 13-year-old girl who lived next door.
So 2 years older than Mary?
Yes, okay. 2 years older. Norma was one of 11 children and had a learning disability. And she was looking for pretty much any way to get out of her chaotic household. So Norma would kind of run away from home and hang out with Mary, and they would dare each other to do, quote, bad things. Started with minor things like stealing candy from the shop or, breaking into abandoned houses, and eventually breaking into their school and vandalizing. But in May 1968, just before Mary's 11th birthday, these dares started to take a violent turn. On May 11th, 1968, Mary and Norma lured a 3-year-old boy from their neighborhood to play with them at an abandoned air raid shelter nearby. This young boy was found hours later, wandering along the street with a serious head injury. When asked what happened, he stated that he'd been playing with the girls when one of them pushed him off a beam, causing him to fall about 7 feet onto the concrete. They then just left them there. He wasn't sure which girl actually pushed him, and since the girls naturally claimed that he just fell accidentally, and because they were so young, they were just given a warning by the police and their families.
That's how it starts a little bit. Like they got away with that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, it wasn't so bad. Let's see if we can take it further.
Right, exactly. So, in the neighborhood where Mary lived, there were many abandoned houses and buildings due to recent efforts to kind of like revitalize the area and newer homes being built. And so she kind of lived in like the bad part of town.
They were gentrifying this space.
They were. Mm-hmm. They were. And so on May 25th, that same year, Mary was playing with 4-year-old Martin Brown in one of these empty houses. And while in an upstairs bedroom, Mary strangled Martin with her hands until he died. He was found a few hours later by some other kids who had come to play in the house. And they ran to get a construction worker who was nearby, who attempted CPR, but it was too late. And initially, the medical examiner was unable to determine the little boy's cause of death because Mary's hands were so small that they had not left any marks on his neck.
We know through doing this podcast that strangling someone is hard to do, and it takes time to do it.
Yes.
Now, I realize this is a 4-year-old kid, but this is also just an 11-year-old girl. Right. I don't know if Mary was small in stature. I assume that she was neglected and didn't eat very much, so I would assume she was small. That could be a bad assumption, but this would take her some time to do. Like, plenty of time to stop.
Yes.
And stop the prank or the dare,
Right.
So
exactly.
Just throwing that out there, that this is pretty vicious for, yeah.
Right. And this is, noted that Norma was not involved in this one. This was all Mary.
Okay.
And this one didn't come out until later.
Okay.
Right. So the next day after this, which coincidentally was Mary's 11th birthday, she and Norma broke into a daycare and vandalized it. They tore off floor tiles, ripped up books, and tipped over desks. They also smeared paint on the walls and wrote notes that were left there. So the 4 notes read as follows.
Pause. I think they're bad.
So they read as follows. And just so you know, they are full of spelling errors and all sorts of things.
So it looks like a note I might have wrote.
Right, exactly. So the first one says, quote, "I murder so that I may come back," end quote. The second one says, quote, "We did murder Martin Brown, so fuck you, you bastard," end quote. The third note said, quote, "Fuck off, we murder, watch out, Fanny and faggot," end quote. And the last one said, quote, "You are mice, because we murder Martin, go brown, you better look out, there are murders about by Fanny, and ald faggot, you screws," end quote.
What does that mean? Do you know?
I think the interpretation is they're obviously confessing to the murder of Martin.
But what's watch
Martin
out,
Brown.
Fanny and faggot?
I think they were just saying bad words.
Oh,
so
like Fanny, not a name, but like my butt.
Or like sort of like in Britain, right? Fanny, I believe, is a term for one's vagina.
Oh.
And then faggot is just a derogatory term, right? So,
or it means a cigarette.
Or it could mean that.
Huh.
Right. So just throwing bad words in there.
Yeah, to maybe sound adult.
Yep, and they spelled fuck wrong. So
yeah, futch.
F-U-C-H.
Yeah.
Right.
Didn't know if that was autocorrect.
Nope, that is intentional. That's how they were written, and they were written in Mary's handwriting. She's the one who wrote them.
Okay.
She did not sign them, obviously, and so this all kind of came out later. But one could see this as really being a cry for help from Mary. Like, she's confessing. She wants, at least a part of her wants to get caught.
Yeah.
And wants to be stopped so that she can get help.
Yeah. Huh.
But, she is barely 11, and so
no
one's ever helped her before.
I'm looking at that first one. I murder so that I may come back. That's just It's kind of creepy. I'm not sure what she meant by that, or if she was just trying to throw people off or what, but that's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Okay.
So, anyway, the police naturally wrote this off as a prank and did nothing. Now, 2 days later, on the day of little Martin's funeral, Mary rang the bell at his house, and when his mom answered, she asked to see him. When his mom told her that she couldn't play with him because he was deceased, Mary reportedly said, quote, "I know he's dead. I want to see him in his coffin." End quote.
Creepy.
And again, sort of like inserting herself into the situation.
Yeah. I think she's a little bit proud of it.
I think there was a little bit of pride in it. I think there was also that kind of that daredevil-y risk of, going there. But I think also maybe wanting someone to ask, how do you know that he's dead?
Sure. Yeah.
So things died down for a month or so. But then on July 31st, 3-year-old Brian Howe didn't come home from playing in the neighborhood when he was expected to. His family and concerned neighbors started searching for him, and around 11 o'clock p.m., the search party found Brian's body hidden between 2 concrete blocks over by the railroad. Brian was partially unclothed, and it appeared that there had been an attempt to hide his body with clumps of grass and plants kind of thrown over him. A pair of broken scissors was on the ground nearby. The coroner determined that he had been strangled, with the killer holding his nose closed with one hand and squeezing his throat with the other. He had puncture marks on his legs and abdomen, including what looked like a crudely drawn letter M or W carved onto his stomach. And his genitals had been mutilated as well. Based on the shallowness of his wounds, the coroner determined that Brian had most likely been killed by another child.
So this just took a really dark turn.
It did.
I'm sure you're going to go over it. But, okay, strangled again. It may be different this time because they apparently closed their nose. The carving, I mean, obviously wanting to be known, because that M, it's probably an M, right? And then what the heck with the genitals? I mean, I guess she was abused.
Right. She had extensive sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And so.
Angry child.
Right.
Okay.
And it looked kind of like, the way they describe it in the book, it was very experimental kind of a thing. Like they didn't quite know what to do or what they were doing with like the cutting and the carving and things like that with the scissors. They were just sort of like seeing what would happen.
Yeah.
And that's part of why they also concluded that it was probably another child as well. Because none of the puncture wounds were deep, or anything like that. It was just sort of surface level.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the next day, police interviewed many children from the neighborhood, including Mary and Norma, who denied being involved. But they did claim to have seen Brian with a boy named, quote, A.
Okay.
And that this boy had been rolling around in the grass with Brian, and Mary had seen him trying to harm a cat with a pair of broken scissors. So referencing the broken scissors was not a detail that had been released to the public. So this kind of gave Mary away.
Yeah.
Several other children also said that they had witnessed Brian with Mary and Norma earlier on the day that he died.
Yeah.
So pretty quickly, the attention turned towards Mary and Norma.
Sure.
So on August 4th, 5 days later, Norma Bell and her parents contacted the police. Norma gave a statement that Mary had confessed to her that she had killed Brian and had taken her to see the body, demonstrating how she had strangled him. A little bit later, Norma then changed her statement to include that she had actually been there when Mary had strangled Brian, but didn't take part in it. Fibers found on Brian's body and his shoes matched the dresses that were worn by both girls on that day. So there was a fiber from Norma's dress and a fiber from Mary's dress. Mary claimed, when asked, that Norma was the one who killed Brian and that she watched. She also did confess to the vandalism at the daycare, and also those notes about killing Martin Brown.
Okay.
So, the girls were arrested at that point. So after being evaluated by a psychologist, Norma was deemed to be cognitively delayed and to have a, quote, submissive personality that would be easily manipulated by others. Mary, on the other hand, was deemed by 4 psychologists to have a psychopathic personality with, quote, social techniques that are primitive and take the form of automatic denial, ingratiation, manipulation, complaining, bullying, flight, or violence.
I mean, are you like me, and I would just love to see those reports to see like what questions were asked and how she answered them for them to come to that?
Yes, that would be fascinating.
Because there's like 4 of them that came to that conclusion.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Based on what I know, just from kind of reading this book and doing some additional research, if I were to give Mary a diagnosis at this point, it would probably be reactive attachment disorder.
Okay. You wouldn't be quite to the psychopathic yet?
I mean, she's 11.
Right. But they do say there's child psychopaths.
There are, yes. But I think that reactive attachment disorder fits better given the extent of her trauma history. And those things like that automatic denial, ingratiating with others, so like putting on that like sweet front so that other people might like you. Manipulation, complaining, violence, that like back and forth between like I'm a sweet child to, you know, I can't trust anyone. That's probably where...
She said it's extreme reactive
Extreme.
With violent
Yeah, extreme reactive attachment disorder.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have seen, you know, in some rare cases, right, like kids with reactive attachment disorder are more likely to say, like, try and harm their, like, siblings or harm, say, like, foster or adoptive parents.
Or like Ted Bundy.
Right.
With his
aunt.
sister, mom.
Sister, aunt.
It was confusing. Because,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Mary was never removed from her home. Social services never stepped in. And so there wasn't new parental figures to lash out at. Because it wasn't safe to lash out at her own.
Yeah. So that's a caveat to reactive attachment disorder is what you're saying. Maybe not a caveat, but like what can happen is if you aren't taken away from the abusive caregivers or whatever that caused the reactive attachment disorder and you're too afraid as the child to do anything to those caregivers, you then turn to other means to be destructive, like in this case, these little boys?
Potentially.
Okay.
I wouldn't say it's, like, common. This is, like you said, an extreme case.
Okay. All right.
But,
I didn't know.
yeah, that's where, if I were to be evaluating little, freshly turned 11-year-old Mary Bell, reactive attachment disorder is where I would go.
Cool.
All right.
That's a modern day diagnosis.
Yes.
Yes. Because this was back in the 60s.
It was, and so that didn't exist yet.
Didn't exist. Got it.
So the trial started on December 5th, 1968, and lasted for 9 days. In a surprise move, the judge on the case ruled that the names of Mary and Norma could be released and published, despite their status as minors. And there was a resulting media circus around the case. You know, here are these 2 kids accused of murder, and we know their names and
Brutal
their
murder.
pictures, right? So both girls pled not guilty. Norma's attorney used the defense that Norma was cognitively delayed and influenced by Mary's psychopathic personality, and that she just witnessed things but did not act or participate. Mary's lawyers tried to say that Mary was the one being influenced by Norma, who was 2 years older than her, but when that was clearly dispelled, they used the defense that Mary's age, traumatic childhood, and obvious brain problems, like obviously there was something wrong with her
Yeah.
in her brain, made her unable to be held criminally responsible for a first-degree murder charge. So basically they were saying that like she's not competent to face this charge specifically.
And she's 11, so
She was 11.
there's merit to that. If she doesn't understand what's happening to her or what she's pleading guilt. I mean, this is England, so it's a little bit different.
Right.
But our court system mirrors the English court system. Then I could see that, you know.
Sure, yeah. And remember, this is 1968. So that was kind of a radical concept at the time.
True. If I'll take your word for it because I haven't studied it that far back, but
Right. So ultimately, in the end, Norma was acquitted of all charges. So she was found innocent. And Mary was found guilty of manslaughter due to the diminished capacity argument. So rather than being convicted of murder, she was convicted of manslaughter. And she was sent to a juvenile detention facility for an indefinite, quote, life sentence.
which can be all sorts of things,
Right.
especially over the pond.
And in England, life sentences are rare. And there's a long quote from the judge on this trial in the book about his difficulty with trying to determine an appropriate sentence, you know, taking into account that she's a child.
Right.
But also that she murdered 2 little boys.
Right. And
And
not
needing to
just
balance
like
that.
drowning them or something, but murdering and mutilating.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that decision was really hard for him to make.
I bet.
So here we are. Mary is 11 years and 6 months old at the time, and this has made her the youngest person ever convicted of a murder-related charge in British history.
Does it still hold?
It still holds. So for several months after that, Mary bounced between temporary placements as there just wasn't a dedicated facility designed to house 11-year-old female murderers.
Sure.
Eventually, Mary was sent to Red Bank Reformatory, where she remained from 1969 until 1973. She was kept in a secure unit with 24 boys. There were rooms for other girls, but very few ever came, and those that didn't stay long, so it was mostly Mary and a bunch of boys.
That probably, I don't know if they go into that, but I'm sure that wasn't safe for Mary.
Correct.
Yeah.
So at first, Mary really struggled with the structure and the rules, bucking against them whenever possible. But eventually she settled, participated in psychiatric services and school. It was noted that Mary's behavior was always more volatile and violent following victims from her mother.
Visits
from her mother.
She was her mother's victim.
She was, yes. But her mother also used Mary's story for her own personal gain through, like, interviews and, like, working on writing a book about her, and she wanted the spotlight.
That tracks.
Yes.
Did Mary's mother, did the stuff that she did to Mary come out during the court process?
I don't know if the full extent of the details came out.
I'm surprised that she is allowed to see Mary, I guess, but maybe that didn't come out till way later.
Right, it's possible. It doesn't say specifically.
Okay.
But, again, it was the 60s.
True.
So while at Red Bank, Mary was sexually assaulted by one of the male staff members and claimed to be sexually assaulted by at least 2 of the other boys that were there as well.
It's weird that they housed her with males.
There was nowhere else for her to be.
I guess, but...
Like, she had a separate room, right? She would, they all had, like, individual rooms, but things happen, right? And during her years there, Mary, with the support of her teachers, staff, and therapists, made some progress in starting to be able to learn to trust others, releasing her anger, and reducing her level of aggression. She made friends, although she remained closed off about herself with kind of most people. But there were several staff members that she mentioned in the book and that were interviewed for the book that, like, she developed, like, a real connection for.
Okay, good.
And with.
I mean, I got to imagine that, like, this institutionalization, she probably needed it in a way because she was just running free and doing whatever she wanted, hurting whoever she wanted, doing, you know, so, like, even though I could see why this would be really, really hard for her, it might also, when she accepted it, been somewhat of a comfort to have that stability.
Absolutely. You know, it's, I think, pretty just sort of a commonly held belief that even when children fight against structure, they secretly want it because it makes them feel safe.
Sure. Makes me feel safe.
Yeah, exactly.
I need my stability, man.
For the first time in her life, for the most part anyway, like, Mary was safe while she was there. And
besides the odd nasty
and
teacher,
most
but
of the
most
staff
time.
who worked there were safe people.
Yeah, good.
So when Mary turned 16 in 1973, she was transferred to Style Prison, an all-women's adult facility. She was the youngest inmate on her block by 6 years, with most of the other women being in their 30s.
Okay.
This was the first time in her life that she was around all women all the time, and she noticed the difference right away. At Red Bank, with the boys, she had learned to solve her qualms with others by essentially just punching them in the face, right? That's what boys do.
I mean,
they fight it out and then they move on.
It works sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Where at Style, the women argued with words, talked about everything, yelled and swore at each other, but it wasn't physical. So here again, Mary had to learn a whole new way to communicate and socialize in order to survive. So after several visits to the what she called, quote, the bleak, which basically sounds like just a horribly conditioned, like, isolation cell, Mary learned the system and started to suppress her emotions in order to avoid being in trouble. So she, right.
So that always works out well.
Exactly. So she held all those feelings in.
Right.
But as a result of holding in so much anger, Mary made 2 suicide attempts during the next 3 years. She moved often between wards and spent some time in, again, what she called, quote, the nut house unit, which kind of sounds like a unit for special needs women who, like, didn't quite require, like, psychiatric hospitalization, but, like, needed extra supports.
Okay.
And while
that
she was in
nice.
There, yes. So sometimes. She, at times, recalled, like, witnessing more violence there, just kind of, like, because the women were more mentally ill. At times, she was forcibly medicated. So it wasn't necessarily, like, a nice, relaxing unit for her to be on.
Yeah.
She stayed there about 6 months before they sent her back to a normal unit.
I mean, it kind of does sound like a psychiatric facility.
It was.
If they're
just
forcing
without the
medication.
Nice stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And without the, treatment.
Yeah.
So, now, in 1976, Mary applied for parole, but was denied. In June 1977, at the age of 19, Mary was moved to a less secure facility called Moore Court. It was an open prison, meaning that residents and prisoners were allowed to, like, leave the buildings and go for walks around the grounds, and to move more freely, like, between spaces inside.
Okay.
Now, 3 months later, Mary and another female prisoner absconded by climbing over the outer wall during visiting hours.
It's not going to end well.
It should be noted that when she was transferred there, Mary, from the very beginning, told the wardens in charge that she was going to run away at some point. And so she followed through with her promise. So the 2 of them, met up with some men who offered them a ride and spent the next few days seeing the sights and hanging out with them. So didn't last very long. Mary was caught on September 13th, 1977, and returned to custody, where she was on lockdown for the next month. And then she remained at Moore Court for the next 2 years.
Okay.
In 1979, 22-year-old Mary Bell was transferred to HM Prison Ashcombe Range, another open facility, where she took classes to learn how to become a secretary. Now, this facility was intended as a transitional program to help prisoners who are going to be paroled or released integrate back into society. So at this point, Mary had been doing so well, hadn't had any problems in a long time, that they felt like she was on the path to be able to be released. So Mary, started a work release program where she went into the nearby town to work as a secretary during the day, and then returned to the facility afterwards. She eventually worked up to being allowed overnight passes and demonstrated responsibility and compliance in following the rules and coming back. And, it had been years at this point since Mary had any sort of aggressive or violent behaviors. She was acting kind of more like I won't say a typical 20-something, but her mental health was under much better control.
Have you heard of prisons in the United States being like this? Halfway prisons, open prisons?
Not so much open prisons. I do know, there are, work release programs and things like that exist in some, jails and prisons.
Yeah, this sounds pretty neat. I don't know if they have stuff like that in the United States. I haven't read about it when we talk about, but we talk about serial killers who are not going to ever get work released.
Right.
So maybe they do have something like this where they can, you've heard of furloughs, but it seems like those are usually psychiatric facilities as opposed to a correctional facility. But I don't know. I think it sounds kind of neat. If the point of prison is to reintegrate, which it's supposed to do, this seems like a good way to do it.
Right, yeah. And I just from what little I know, and I will not claim to be an expert on this, it does seem like many prison systems in other Western countries are far more about actual rehabilitation, as opposed to the kind of American prison system, which is more about punishment.
That's what it seems like too. I know we have penitentiaries here, which are supposed to, you do your penance, but I don't know. Right. Anyhow, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So eventually, Mary was released from prison in May of 1980 at the age of 23 and after serving nearly 12 years. So she served longer in prison than she had been alive before she went to prison.
Yeah.
Upon her release, she was granted anonymity by the courts, meaning that her release was not made public, and she was provided with a new name. A spokesperson at the time said, quote, "Belle wishes to be given a chance to live a normal life and to just be left alone." End quote. In 1984, Mary had a daughter, her only child, who is only known as Z in court documents, as Mary's anonymity clause was extended to her daughter as well. And in 2003, after reporters ended up finding them and causing a big stir, this ruling was extended to apply to both of them for the rest of both of their lives. So at this time, Mary Bell is living under an assumed name somewhere in the United Kingdom. She's 68 years old, and since her release from prison, Mary has not committed any further crimes.
How do you feel about the sentence she received? Do you feel like it was fair given her age?
I think the intention of it was, knowing that life is not necessarily life.
Well, if you look at it as life, she did do a full life in prison.
Right, yeah.
She went in as 11, came out 23.
Right, exactly. But I do think the amount of time she actually stayed in prison, I do think was an appropriate amount of time for her to grow and mature and get a lot of the help that she needed to be able to be like a functioning person in society. Yeah. Right. She did a lot of therapy when she was in prison. She did schooling. She passed her O-levels, which is basically kind of like graduation.
Okay.
From high school while she was in prison. And essentially, we can see she was rehabilitated.
Right. I mean, and she's what, nearly 70?
Yep.
And as far as we know, she hasn't done a violent crime since.
Right. Yep.
Probably any crime, because then I don't know how it works over there, but she'd probably get stuck back in jail if she violated parole or whatever.
Yeah. And in her kind of musings, looking back over her life, she talks about not really understanding death and its permanence.
Sure, exactly.
When she was 11 years old. It's like she knew that they were dead, but it didn't register that dead meant forever.
Well, and I mean, it's almost like when you look at the not guilty by reason of insanity, one of the things where that you have to prove is that you don't understand what you're doing is like permanent, right? To somebody else. I mean, she's not claiming insanity, but a child
right
doesn't have that mental capacity to totally understand what they're doing.
Which is why that diminished capacity defense reduced the charge from like intentional murder to manslaughter.
Yeah. I don't know where that cutoff line is though when you do know that death is permanent. 11 does seem like you should know, but Mary did not have a normal life, so
exactly the way she described it was that no one had ever talked to her about death. She hadn't had like a family relative that had died yet. And interestingly, she said her only experience with death had been her dog, who had died twice, but then always seemed to reappear 2 days later.
Oh, so like maybe it ran away and came back, or
no, I think it was like died, and then like dad bought an identical puppy and brought it home.
Well, that would be confusing,
right? So like she was so neglected, like no one ever talked to her about death and what it meant and all of that.
Well, what a crazy, sad story. Poor little boys' families.
Right. Yeah, there was some controversy when this book came out in the late 90s because Mary did receive some payment for it.
Right.
So they now have the similar law to what we have here about that, but at the time they didn't.
Sure.
And so her victims' families were pretty upset about that.
Do you remember what other serial killer made money off of his crimes?
I do. It was our good friend. Well, he wasn't a killer so much as a rapist.
Well, we might be talking about two different killers. Mine's definitely a killer. The Beast of British Columbia. When he was paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars for telling the police where the bodies were buried?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I wasn't thinking
It wasn't a
about
book.
him.
Who were you thinking of?
I was thinking of... Why can I not think of his name?
He was a rapist.
Serial rapist, multiple personalities.
Oh, Billy
Milligan.
Milligan.
Yes. Yeah. That's
They've
why the law was
had
created.
a movie made off him. What was it called? Crap, I forgot.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Yes. Him too. Yeah. Well, Courtney, thank you for doing all your research on this and letting me just ask some questions impromptu like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at the end of the day, just because I know we all love a good diagnosis.
Oh, yeah. Give it to us.
Borderline personality disorder.
Woohoo for the win.
Yep. Just kind of the way that she had to learn to survive in prisons. And, recovering from that trauma and everything.
Definitely impulsive.
Yep. Impulsive, manipulative, using sexuality, suicide attempts.
All the good stuff.
All the good stuff.
Yeah. Well, we do actually have another case prepared.
We do.
So we're going to work on that. So hopefully there won't be months between these two.
Hopefully just a week.
Yeah. He is another guy, and he's a serial killer. So back to our regular choice of awful people.
Yes, because I don't think of Mary as an awful person. She was a child who had horrible things happen to her and acted out the only way she knew how.
She just acted out young enough to get fixed. I don't want to say fixed. To get intervention.
Right, exactly.
I mean, had she held out till she was an adult, all of this internalized angst, who knows if we would have had like another Eileen Wuornos on her hands. Like,
right.
I mean, It could have ended. I mean, this was awful for what happened to these families, but thank goodness we caught it when we did. Or
Exactly.
they caught it when they did.
Exactly.
She had a chance.
Yep.
So, good for her,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels weird saying
She
that.
took advantage of the help that was offered.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say? Like, you know how we do our little end thing? Do you have one prepared?
Oh, I don't.
Let me see. What do you do? Oh, I feel too bad doing one on this one because they're all kids, so we'll just skip it.
Right. Yeah.
We'll say.
Either way, just go to therapy.
Yeah, go home, go to therapy. That's all we got. Okay. Well, we'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye.